Guys, thanks for making yourselves available. Hope you're all doing well. These are strange times. I think we all know that. And I'm just curious before we get started, what your perspectives are on where you think we are in this. I mean, we're a couple of months into effective lockdown. I'm just now starting to thaw, but where do you think we are? Mauricio, out of curiosity, what do you think?
Hey, Bob, good afternoon. Well, Bob, I think that's $1 million question. Right now, there is a lot of confusion, a lot of information. And I would say the only thing I can say with certain level of certainty is that we are at the end of the beginning. After being 4 months into this pandemic, I think there's a lot of confusion on one side, a lot of information, but also there are some things that we already know, right? So the first one is no one is immune. This has devastating effects on the employment and therefore the economy. And it seems that there's consensus among the scientists that until a vaccine or a medication is available, this pandemic will be put under control. Therefore, I would say, in my perspective, from a business planning, we should think on 12 to 18 months.
Anyone else? Edward, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I think maybe to clarify what Mauricio was saying as well, it's not 12 to 18 months of lockdown, but 12 to 18 months possibly of dealing with this as a reality in your business. A couple of things maybe to add in. I think this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all reopening. I mean, things are starting to reopen in some places, but even in the state of Florida, South Florida is still locked down for non-essential businesses. The rest of Florida is starting to open. So if you're a local business, your local reality will be fairly clearly defined. But if you're nationally or internationally driven in your business, then you're going to have to build in those realities that each of those markets are going to open at slightly different times in different ways, and build that into your planning. And the second thing, I think on a positive note, if there is one, and that is that unlike, say, 2008, when the credit markets collapsed, this economic downturn or reality that we're dealing with now wasn't driven by fundamentals being horribly wrong. We had a great economy, certainly in the US, a robust economy. It was intentionally shut down to prevent the spread of a virus. So there were no fundamental flaws in the markets per se. And I think hopefully that'll mean that it'll bounce back a little easier and a little sooner than from something like 2008. Certainly not overnight, but hopefully sooner.
That's actually a good transition to the next question, which I was going to bring up, which is, look, we're old enough that while this is a crisis unlike any we've ever seen in our lifetimes, it's not the first extremely severe crisis that many of us have been through in our working careers. I mean, 9/11 for sure, collectively everyone remembers, and really how incredibly scary that was as a national security event. And then the collapse in 2008 was unforeseen by most and devastating financially globally. So I'm curious, Edward, you kind of had a positive view, or at least gave some insight on past crises. I'll lead off with you. Are there lessons that you see from those crises that you went through in your career that you think are helpful that people keep in mind? As some people have, weren't in their business careers and so don't have that perspective, and others were and may have forgotten.
Sure. I think for me, the first real crisis I had to deal with when I had my own business in Manhattan was the internet bubble bursting in the year 2000. I just started the business, self-funding it, was looking for angel money right when the bubble burst, and it changed everything overnight. It went from, oh, this is a kind of a fun idea, let's give it $10 million, to, well, what are the fundamentals? Projections for cash flow and for profitability. So I think that whenever you're coming out of a bubble bursting, it comes back to fundamentals. Does the business make sense? Is it viable? Eyeballs aren't going to be the important thing coming out of this. It's cash flow. It's margins in your business. Is there a market for it? What is your USP relative to your competitors? Are you strong in that area? These are the things that matter coming out of times like this. And so if the answer to those questions are, yes, my model's strong and my margins are good, and it's just going to take hunkering down to make it work, and a lot of good work, hard work, and maybe a little good luck, then you're in pretty good shape. If you had fundamental issues with your business before this happened, this is really just going to exacerbate those. So maybe you should be asking yourself some really hard questions like, am I really viable coming out of this, or am I viable in the way that I was operating before?
Gary, out of curiosity, you've had a long career with a lot of interesting experiences and have, seen some cycles and some big events. Any lessons that would be helpful or perspectives to share?
I think one thing I would add to the comments already made is that for a lot of companies, even if you were fundamentally sound before this, there's going to be some amount of uncertainty as to whether all those fundamentals will be the same coming out the other end. If changes in consumer behavior, buying power, buying patterns have shifted, then you have to shift your fundamentals as well. For me, it's looking at a company holistically, and if you are performing well or if you are underperforming, this is really an opportunity to reassess how your business is run from a 360-degree view. And while we're kind of in this pause, reassess and make sure that you buttress your operating procedures, your overhead, and so on, so that when you do come out the other end, you come out in the best possible position you can.
And Bob, I would just add to what they have said is that every single business needs to be objective on what has changed and how to move forward. Human beings tend to stick to what they know and work on the fundamentals that they believe they have in their businesses. This pandemic, for sure, it's a resetter for every single business, and everyone needs to look at their own business and define what's the future for that business. Is that business sustainable? Can they maintain the business in a profitable way? And one of the things that I've learned, I have dealt with many crises throughout my career due to the way it was developed. I developed my career first half in emerging markets in Latin America, where you have crises every 4 years, and the second half in North American developed markets. And basically what I think people will need to do is manage the business in a very short-term focus to make sure that their business is viable. And if it's viable, keep on moving. If not, they have to make a fast decision to stop the bleeding. I've seen people being obsessed on trying to maintain a business that is just not fundamentally viable, right? And this will be the moment just to step out and say no, or what do I need to do? They need to consult with experts, someone to help them understand and say, okay, listen, this is beyond my capacity. I'm going to look for some help to someone come and help me assess my business.
Nathan, out of curiosity, you're a little younger, don't have the same mileage that some of the rest of us on the call do. So 9/11 might be a little bit pushing it, but you were certainly around for the 2008 crisis. I'm curious what observations you'd have to share.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I certainly remember where I was on 9/11, and certainly working in corporate America, but not at the experience level that I'm at now. I think what I am noticing specifically between 2008 and today, if there's two things we can take from it, is going to be this new normal preparedness and pivoting. And I think that we always have business continuity plans. We're always thinking through, what would happen, what do we do if the unimaginable were to occur? But I live in Houston, Texas. You all live in South Florida. We are prepared for disasters, specifically natural disasters. This pandemic is a type of natural disaster with severe economic consequences. I think that moving forward, the businesses that have thought through their preparedness strategies are going to be better positioned to weather a storm, and that does include the confidence to be able to pivot when necessary. So to the points that are being made about business viability and feasibility, I think part of preparedness planning needs to be asking yourself those questions and backing it up with the financial data to be able to ask and answer the question, is your business viable? If it is not, what are the pivots that are going to be needed in order for you to maintain viability or to look for a smart exit? And the another thing I'd like to point out is one thing that this that this pandemic has shown us is it's shined a light on segments of the community that take preparedness importantly. And in the past, maybe over preparedness had been a butt of a joke, right? If you are preparing too much, you might be thought of as someone who is paranoid. I'm certainly not advocating for any sense of paranoia, but I think this pandemic has shown us that the importance of preparedness cannot be understated in these situations. So think through, what do you do with your business in the event of a hurricane? What could you do in the event of an economic collapse? Here in Texas, what we're facing with is, what do we do with the collapse of the oil and gas economy? My city is 30%, 3 out of 10 employees are directly connected to oil and gas, and more outside of that are tangentially connected to oil and gas. We have seen the collapse of that economy happening in tandem with overall economic fallout through this pandemic. So there's a level of preparedness that we weren't ready for, but those businesses that are going to be thinking that way, have those plans in place, willing to meet them, are going to be best suited to weather these situations. And I think it's just an area that everyone needs to pay more attention to and take more seriously.
So those are some general observations on, where we are and kind of what we've seen in general. But I'm sure a lot of the audience are thinking, okay, I understand that I need to focus on fundamentals, and understand that I might need to pivot. And I understand that I might need to assess the viability of my business, and that which is not essential, I may, because of resource issues, I might have to discard. I think it'd be helpful to drill down to the next level of that insight. And so I'm curious if each of you would have a couple of things that are more specific that you would advise our small and medium-sized businesses or lower middle market, however you prefer to refer to them, on what they should be doing right now. And Gary, you've got an extensive background in lower middle market, even large market turnarounds. So much of what people are having to do right now first is about stopping the bleeding, which is inevitably financial. I'm curious what insights you would have to share.
There are 3, 4, 5 points I think that are probably more important than others when you're facing distress like this. The first that's already been mentioned is cash flow. When I work with companies that are in trouble, the very first thing we do is we build out a short-term cash flow model, literally going down to the week. I like to help the company put together a 16-week cash flow model, all-encompassing, so that we understand where we are. In a lot of cases, and we're starting to see that now at the front end of the retail environment with J. Crew, we're seeing maybe a tipping point where companies that have been on the edge financially and not performing well are going to fall through the cracks here because they have no choice. Their borrowing sources are shut off. Their liquidity has no room left. And I'm sure that other companies are going to follow suit here. So I think the most important thing small and medium-sized companies can do right now is to take a really hard look at cash flow. Look at their current situation, forecast out as best they can to see where they will be. The more knowledge you have about where you'll be in 1 month, 2 months, 2 months, and 3 months, the smarter you'll be about making decisions today. Which brings me to my second point, and that is a sense of urgency. Over the last 25, 30 years, I've seen countless companies fail because not for lack of recognizing the problem, but for not responding to it quickly enough. So in addition to getting your cash flow locked down, you need to shift your thinking to a matter of acting with urgency. The third thing I would suggest, and all of these are good bullet points for a future more in-depth conversation, but the third thing to think about here is partnering up with your key constituents. It's important to, I think, for every company to try to avoid surprises during this crisis. And if you're having some cash flow issues, if you're having supply issues, if your fulfillment rates are falling, you need to reach out and talk to your major customers. If you have contract customers, your distribution chain, your supply chain, everybody that's a key constituent of your business ought to be hearing from you, so that nothing breaks. And everyone will appreciate the outreach, and you will help soften the blow when things do get strained. For companies that have a large public constituency in the consumer market, for example, this is a personal choice, but I always prefer to over communicate rather than under communicate. My worry in distress situations is lack of information about how a company's doing or what its plans are leaves a void. And especially in times like this, human nature tends to fill that void with the worst possible assumptions. So if you don't speak out and set and control the agenda, the agenda will be set for you. So I always strongly recommend that you do some outreach and outbound communicating to your constituents. And finally, the last point I would make here is that there can't just be one person doing all this. You have to build a team within your business to address this. I mean, a business is multifunctional, right? You have sourcing, you have sales and marketing, you have finance and accounting, a dozen different critical things that need to do well and operate in this stressed environment. You have to build an interfunctional team within your organization so that each piece of it is pulling in the same direction. Of course, that's especially challenging. The smaller the business is, the less resources you have. Not every business has the luxury of having a department head for each of these functions. So, that very well could be a perfect opportunity when you might want to bring in some support to make sure that you're doing everything you possibly can to survive.
It's very helpful, Gary. Mauricio, you've had experience in multiple continents, and you've seen a variety of crises, some that we've named before, like 9/11 and 2008. And internationally, you've seen governments come and go and other crises as well. I'm curious what handful of things you might say to some of the SMBs that are listening today that they need to be jumping on and working on right now to salvage their business.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Gary mentioned. I would just add that it's critical to have a vision, right? Where are you trying to go? And I'm not trying to be strategic and really long-term. Is, hey, listen, I want to save my business and I want to have a profitable business, right? That's a pretty simple statement. And it has save and sustain and profitable, right? Those two things need to go together. And then you start making your decisions based on that. If you have a team that will support you, that's a message for them. If you are mostly a decision maker, well, at least you know what decisions you need to make. So that's the first thing. Start with, what are you trying to accomplish, right? Right now, I think everyone is in survival mode, so I think that will be a fair statement for most of the businesses. I will not get into the cash flow part that Gary mentioned because I have nothing to add. I will add to the what are the other fundamentals that you need to look at. And one that is critical in every business is you need to protect your top line, right? You need to bring business in. And to bring business in, you need to look at what business you are in and then define the fundamentals. I am coming mostly from the CPG industry, where basically you have several clients, you have several products, and you have several profitability of those. You need to assess where they are and if there has been any change in the consumer or the retail, right? You need to look at your assortment. The first thing that retailers will do with these crises is they will look at assortment and they will say, these are fast-moving products, these are not. I need to eliminate these and bring this one. They will also look at the profitability, right? Which products are more profitable for them and which are not. So you have to look at that and redefine your commercial strategy. And I agree with Gary. You have to communicate that to your business, to your clients, to your suppliers. Based on that, you need to see then protecting the top line is make sure that you have enough product coming into the pipeline, right? So you need to sort of look at your suppliers, see if they have capacity, and then you have capacity to produce whatever you are producing. And lastly, you need to look at your distribution network, right? Either it's yours or you're using a third party. during this crisis, many people will go out of business. So you might have your plan, but if part of your system or your infrastructure is not in place, you will have problems. So it's important that you look at your business in a holistic way so you can guarantee your cash flow, your top line, and obviously your bottom line, right? So then you have to go to cost and everything.
Thank you. Nathan, you've dealt with a variety of different companies, from the marketing perspective. I'm curious, a handful of things that you think would be very valuable for them to consider as they're facing this really, unforeseen crisis.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Let's think about it. I like sound bites, right? Things that help me remember things, mnemonic devices. And I've been thinking through this. I like to think of this as the 5-5-5 method, something to focus on in preserving your business. Identify and communicate clearly with your top 5 clients, the clients that increase your bottom line, that provide revenue, that help grow your company, and pay special attention to them. Focus on your 5 colleagues, your 5 support sources that help you deliver better product or better service to those clients. Reach out to them, stay in contact with them, understand what they're dealing with, and have a constant flow of communication. And then the third 5 would be, who are your top 5 influencers or referral sources, depending on what line of business you're in, and make sure that you are communicating with those folks. I think we see a lot of advice that's being thrown out now. Communication is king, and of course it is, and that's no different before, during, or after a crisis like we're in. But it can be overwhelming. So I think providing a level of focus in any way that you can do that is going to be useful. So I lean towards, and I've given the advice to clients, remember 5-5-5. Your 5 top clients, your 5 best colleagues, and your 5 influencers or referral sources, and really devote some resource and time into them.
Edward, you are a turnaround guy for Bozell globally. You saw even, well-known global crises and also crises, of the business level or even internationally. You've started, created, and exited your own business during the bubble and through 9/11. I'd be curious if you could wrap us up here with some final and different thoughts that might be helpful to the people in our audience today as to how they can get through this mess we're currently in.
Sure. I think, I think for me, the key word is mindset. Having run a business that's had significant issues and problems, some created by me and mistakes that I made, some created by outside influences, such as 9/11 or 2008. I think mindset is so important for business leaders right now. You hear a lot in the news about, well, when is it going to turn back on again? When is the economy going to restart again? And there's no magic switch that's going to be flipped where everything is suddenly back on again. There is a new reality, and you do have to face that. I think, as Mauricio said, a time of reflection. Can I do this going forward, or not? I mean, if you run out your cash flow projections, which is what Gary was saying you need to do, and you do need to do, and the picture is bad or good, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. It's all how you approach it and look at it. And I would say that to get through this, find the opportunities. There are always opportunities created by crises like this. If you find you can't continue going, maybe the opportunity is some sort of a merger, or working with someone that can help get some value out of the assets of your business, so it's not a complete wash. Going forward, look for the opportunities. It's a time to reflect and say, well, is this business line, I kind of thought it was great, but it's not really delivering for me. And to Nathan's point, we'll focus on what is, the 5 that are, 4, 3, 2, 6 that are, focus on those. So it's a question of how you approach this coming out of this. And if you're looking to find the opportunities, an opportunity to reevaluate staff. Do we have the right staff? Do we have too many? These are hard questions, but I think it's very easy when things like this happen, when any negative thing happens in the business, you're wearing a lot of hats, you get dragged down into the mud, and you finish the day with your head in your hands and you think, what did I accomplish today? We didn't move the business forward at all. You have to get out of that mindset and look for, let me step out of that and say, where are the opportunities here for my business to do better, for me to do better, for my team to do better? And without that approach, it's going to be very difficult to come out of this thing whole. I think if you had to sum it up in 2 words, it's tenacity and resolve. You've got to have the tenacity to stick with it and the resolve to do what's necessary for the security of your business going forward. If you can do these things, then there's a lot of opportunities still to be created out of something like this.
It's very helpful. Look, one of my favorite sayings is, it's been attributed to several people. I heard Sam Zell say it. It's when the tide goes out, you find out who's been swimming naked. And, you know, I think some of the things we've heard today are cash is king, focus on the fundamentals. Essentially what you guys have said is the world is about to be streamlined, and that really will get down to the fundamentals of your business, that extraneous or luxury areas are going to be gone. And that the other thing that I heard today is that communication is critical. In general, over communication is good. Nathan's counterpoise to that is that just, you know, you might want to focus it, but you need to be communicating to your key strategic relationships, and urgency. You know, it's like the old adage about bandages. You can take them off slow and painful or fast and painful. And in this case, slow is going to cause more problems down the road. So urgency is really critical. Guys, I think what you've offered today is super helpful to the audience, and this is a good start as to further discussions. I think in our next set of podcasts, what we'll want to do is drill down individually in your areas of expertise, even more specifically about how people can survive and potentially even thrive in the crisis. So thanks for your time today, and we'll do this again sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.